Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this Cambridge Festival session. I'm going to be joined over the next 60 minutes by Shannon Pierson and Matteo Zallio from the University of Cambridge, and also Michelle Lim from Cambridge Consultants. And start with Michelle. She's a behavioural scientist who specialises in the intersection of psychology, AI, and physical digital systems. She works in the multidisciplinary team of human-machine understanding at Cambridge Consultants, where she tackles cutting-edge challenges where deep nuances, human understanding is required. Michelle, I'll start with you then, and the what do you do all day question.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. That's a really great question. So, as you mentioned, we look at problems where deep, nuanced human understanding is required. And I think nowhere is that more evident than in the metaverse. So, in general, my passion is developing human-centric technologies, in particular informed by psychological models, agile user research, and trusted and assured by design. And this is the underpinning passions which shape my interest in the metaverse. So I'm interested in the evolution of technology, how it shapes interactions between people, how it shapes interactions between people and the objects that they use in the real world. And as we move towards a deeper relationship with cyberspace, how the virtual world influences people in the real world. And in particular, we think that when we're building technology, whether physical or digital, it should be about optimizing human well-being as well as improving, whatever the task you're working on. So those are the two missions that we have when we say, technology development.
We'll tackle some of those in a little while. But Michelle, how fast would you say the metaverse is actually moving in terms of the development and the speed at which the technology is changing?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be fair, the metaverse is very much a blend of various technologies, some moving faster than others, so including AI. And I was reading an article today about how generative AI will influence the metaverse. So that's a big technology. There is, of course, virtual reality and augmented reality, or spatial computing, whatever you call it, which also has seen advances in recent years. There's 3D animation. There's the blockchain technology, and all of those shape the layers of what we in the metaverse. So how it shapes user experience, the creator economy, decentralization, the infrastructure, and all of that technology stack. So I'm looking forward to, discussing more about this ecosystem with everybody else later.
Yeah, we shall find out. Thank you very much. Let's move to Shannon now. She is the Public Interest Cybersecurity Fellow at UC Berkeley's Center for Long-Term Cyber Security. And of the group here today, the only one of us not actually based in Cambridge right now. You're in the States in California, I think, Shannon.
That's right. I'm in Southern California right now. But yeah, so I'm currently with UC Berkeley, but I also am an affiliate at the Mindrew Center for Technology and Democracy at Cambridge. Last year, we put together a pretty comprehensive report on the potential privacy, cybersecurity, and platform governance challenges ahead for us in the metaverse and with extended reality technologies. So many great things are going to come from this technology. However, there are harms and challenges that are manifesting that we believe that we need to address. These problems are by no means insurmountable, but if left unaddressed, these problems could become entrenched into metaverse infrastructure and business models in ways that may be difficult to untangle later.
Are there learnings perhaps from sort of the early days of the internet, but our experience of the internet over these past 20, 25 years plus, which we can now apply to the metaverse so we don't basically end up making the same mistakes all over again?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I mean, kind of in the near period of time, I would say that at least for a lot of the social networking platforms that we're seeing kind of arise in the metaverse today, they're very similar to social media. They're kind of like the next iteration. And what we're seeing in places like Horizon Worlds and Roblox is that a lot of the problems that we see on social media today are kind of manifesting in the metaverse. So we see like harassment, we see like objectionable extremist content. We're seeing a lot of like hate speech and things like that. A lot of the same run-of-the-mill problems that you see in trust and safety at social media companies. And they're just definitively different in the metaverse because the content is a lot more complex. It's not just text and images and videos, it's actually like avatars, entire immersive worlds, everything is very live. So it's very difficult for these companies and platforms to moderate because they have to build entirely new systems that can operate in a spatial computing medium. So there's a lot of challenges ahead, but also a lot of opportunity. Us addressing those problems now and kind of designing like systems that can do it at scale is the next challenge. But I do think that we can create spaces that people want to spend time in the metaverse.
Right. Let's thank you very much, and let's move across to Matteo, who is the founder of the Metaverse Institute. I hope I've said that right. He's also a senior fellow at the University of Cambridge at Hughes Hall. Matteo, tell us a little bit first of all about the Metaverse Institute and your work there.
For sure. Thank you, Julian. Well, the Metaverse Institute is a community-driven, independent, non-for-profit think tank, really dedicated to establishing a new field of research, but most importantly, to democratize knowledge. Make sure that everybody in the world knows about the potential, the opportunities, but also the challenges that technologies such as the metaverse, augmented reality, and extended reality can bring to individuals, to communities. Also, we really focus on our effort on developing ethical best practices and standards through scientific research. We really focus on aspects of integrity, privacy, safety, and something that we really found impactful, the way to access the door to the metaverse. So how diversity, equity, inclusion, and the ability to access this technology can really have a tremendous, can really impact how communities and individuals use and of course access and onboard to this technology. So essentially our vision is really to enable a more sustainable but also ethical and safer development of these augmented reality and virtual reality technologies that can really shape our community and our world for the future.
I'm sensing here that the ethics dimension is almost one of the most important areas here. Yes, we'll come on to discuss the kind of things that the metaverse does, but this need to maintain the ethics and building it in early on as the metaverse develops. Would you say that's right, Matteo?
Well, you actually hit a really good, a really key point here. So think about how many decades it took for us to develop a physical world that is truly or partially accessible and inclusive. In some parts of the world, we live in cities that are accessible. We live in buildings that are quite accessible and inclusive. However, we still have a lot of work to do for physical environments in certain parts of the world. And so the challenge here was, how could we set up, how can we develop, how can we release technologies for the metaverse and virtual worlds that actually are ethically developed, because we take a lesson learned from the design of the physical world. So aspects around accessibility, inclusion, safety, which all sit within the realm of ethics, are really critical to be explored earlier on before we deploy this technology to the largest scale possible. So that's why I think the ethical dimension, it's really impactful to make sure that society can positively benefit from the use of the metaverse and, broadly speaking, virtual reality and augmented reality.
And so there is this desire then to, if you like, jump a few stages ahead in order to make sure that the world around the do you have a word around a metaverse? I guess you probably can. The world in which the metaverse is inhabiting, or those from the real world who are going there, are basically adhering to rules. Is there anybody who is overseeing any of this?
Well, this is a great question because in the past 2 years and a half, there has been an effort from different countries, but also different organizations to develop policies, to develop standards and regulations. Some of our work at the Metaverse Institute was used to inform the creation of one of the most important European acts and policies around this technology. However, there is no strong rule that has to be that is going to strongly influence and that is developed specifically for the metaverse. So right now we're mostly looking at the standards and regulations that are applicable to the web. So this is a really interesting area, and it's a really critical area to explore because, as just Shannon mentioned, it's important that this technology is going to be understood, and most importantly, is going to be developed with safeguarding mechanisms in order to ensure that individuals and communities can benefit from it in a positive way.
And can you imagine, you said that looking towards the internet, can you imagine the same, almost maybe the same organizations which have oversight rather than control, which have oversight now on the internet? And is it likely that those same bodies are going to also apply themselves within the world of the metaverse, or is it, say, different people to step forward?
Well, it's hard to have a clear answer right now because basically we're developing the metaverse. It's not a mass marketed technology. Only a handful of people, so let's say a couple of millions, are currently using this technology, versus billions of people are actually using the internet. So I think we need to actually have a critical mass of not just organizations, but also experts in this technology that can really boost the development of standards or policies, and will help to actually inform how regulated this environment and this technology will be.
Also, just to bounce off of what Matteo just said, I think when thinking about regulation, the online safety bill in the UK is a bill that kind of regulates social media companies to ensure that they remove and take down objectionable negative content and harmful content to the user. And a lot of lawmakers have said that, or the lawmakers who created that bill have said that it will apply to the metaverse, saying that anything communicated within the metaverse will be liable to that bill. So there is an expectation that Ofcom and that specific bill may apply to the metaverse, but it's unclear at this point how closely they're monitoring and enforcing that yet.
And it does get complicated, doesn't it? Because, say, for example, YouTube, if you go to Ofcom and try to complain about YouTube, not that anybody would want to, of course, but they'd say, well, that's not us because YouTube's registered in Ireland. So for the purposes of UK legislation, it counts as an Irish company. So there's all these sort of overlaps, which I can imagine being 10 times, 100 times worse when it comes to the metaverse.
Yeah, completely. I mean, when we think about drivers, for example, and I like how comprehensive you're talking about it, because when you mentioned, Julian, the legal point, Shannon mentioned, the social point of, but there's also the economic bit, there's now increasing reliance on the internet for a lot of economic transactions as people do stuff, as people transact there. So, there's almost to the extent of, fraud and scams and things like that, which leak into that. Political politically, there's already, notions that politics is moving increasingly online, and how both the clean and the dirty side of it, and how that influences in the metaverse. So when we look across the whole domain from social to economic to political to the legal implications of it. And then there's also the environmental concerns, and how do you safeguard, increasing computational powers to run these 3D worlds. And then there's the technology which is being built across so many different companies, from startups to big companies. And some of them, for example, on the blockchain, isn't necessarily owned by a single party as well. So there are almost such a big attack or surface area on which you have to safeguard, that it is honestly, it's such a great thing that so many people are working together on it.
Do you think there's going to be room for, I don't know, I guess some sort of self-certification if a company is setting up a world within the metaverse, that it will be their responsibility to make sure everybody's safe, and then somebody else oversees them and similar organizations?
I would probably defer to Shannon and Matteo as probably the most future-looking of our group in terms of what the future of regulation or oversights or all of that will be, how different or similar you think it is compared to the internet. Because obviously now there is some responsibility on ownership on the company to ensure that stuff in their space is legitimate. But I think a growing trend in the metaverse is this rise of the creator economy, or the idea that a lot of things are co-created. And in fact, there's this open versus closed gate concept, right? And some people think that actually the open gate concept is the way to go. So as a company, you don't necessarily want to be in charge of a world and populating that world, because that is quite a tiring job, and you may not get the level of engagement that you want anyway. So if you're moving towards a co-created world, I think all the lines become a little bit more blurry. It's no longer as simple as, this is a website, I update it every however often and make sure it all stays fine.
I can imagine a scenario in 10 or so years' time when there's some headline somewhere, and that some big metaverse world has just been closed because the people behind it don't want to continue. The sort of thing we've seen with some of the social networks in the past. Shannon, I'd like to pick up this sort of area of governance and who's looking after things with you, because I think you've worked on a recent University of Cambridge report that looked into things like data privacy, cybersecurity, and platform governance. And I was wondering what your findings tell us.
Yeah, we have been able to kind of review what is kind of out there in terms of regulation, specifically from a bunch of different angles. And as of course, we've got for the online safety bill that has a lot of obligations for these companies to kind of do like to monitor the kinds of harms that are happening on their platform. But right now it's kind of vague, as to what content it really refers to. I think that going to privacy, I think that is the biggest area for regulation to kind of grow and change, because extended reality headsets and metaverse technologies are they're like an amalgamation of a variety of different biosensors taking in a lot of different sensitive biometric information. So like your pupil dilation, your heart rate, your facial expressions, your hand motion movements, your skin conductance, just a lot of different sensitive data types that the user may not necessarily know is being tracked throughout the entirety of gameplay. And these kinds of biometric markers can be indicative of personal information. Like, for example, like your hand and your head movement, that being recorded over time is actually as identifiable as like a fingerprint or a face print.
Because we all have these little tics, don't we? These little things that we do from time to time. Do this thing now, just moving my hand around for no apparent reason. I do that when I'm on the phone. If I'm on the radio, I just move my hands around from time to time. So I guess within a metaverse, this could be spotted, interpreted, and I don't know, at some point put to evil purposes.
It could, I mean, it can be indicative of medical conditions. It can be like this data can reveal a lot about you. So for privacy law, it's going to need to adapt because these aren't necessarily like, especially for hand and head movements, that's not necessarily falling into the realm of like biometric data, but maybe it should. So for like laws like GDPR, I think that there needs to be some level of reevaluation to see what are the new data types being created in the metaverse and how do we protect that information so that it's not used to target people, to profile people in ways that like infringe on their rights.
Well, we know it might be. This is the thing, and with on the internet, you know, every few weeks, possibly even more frequent than that, there's news that there's been some data leak of your passports. As a customer of a certain water company, I was informed that my details were sold on the dark web, and that's almost like an everyday occurrence. It feels like. So we've got to, I don't know, really double down within the metaverse to make sure that and worse doesn't end up falling into the wrong hands somehow through, I don't know, carelessness from a company who should know better.
Absolutely. There needs to be security by design in the hardware. Many researchers have begun seeing cybersecurity vulnerabilities in these sensors because, I mean, these are like IoT devices, Internet of Things devices with so many different sensors, and they're not necessarily built for security. So there needs to be some obligations for these companies to constantly be kind of like red teaming their products, sealing vulnerabilities, patching so that data streams that are sensitive are not given to bad actors or given to unauthorized third parties.
And the Internet of Things area is an interesting one. I seem to remember being told not too long ago that the average household had something like 11 devices connected to the internet. I looked at mine the other day and it was like 38, 39, all you know, small things from printers through to connected TVs. But all of these things soon add up and people can get quite a bit of information about you very quickly.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting to talk about data right now because with one of our research, we found that there are huge opportunities for organizations to use strategies like the bespoke behavioral advertising, which is basically a strategy that leverages the user's behavioral and biological data to customize advertising and content in the metaverse. And
So
think about
we used, for example, if we sit down in front of a TV screen, you know, us living in Cambridge, we might all of a sudden get an advert which relates to a Cambridge company, even on a sort of a national broadcast by satellite, because they've inserted it, or we're listening an online stream, and that's inserted again. So are we suggesting here, Matteo, that we can actually, or that can be taken even further forward to even more personalization going in within the metaverse?
it might be, and is a concern, but is also a huge potential. I mean, think about how likely you would be to be making a decision because you have seen certain content that has been stimulated by perhaps your own thinking or something you said or how your eye blinking has happened throughout a particular time frame before seeing a specific advertisement in your VR or AR glasses. This is not just about the metaverse. This can be really related to a lot of other applications and tools and services that we currently use throughout the internet. But this is going to be accelerated extremely by artificial intelligence and generative AI. So essentially, what can a system record about us can be reused, and it can actually tweak our decisions and our behavior and our mindset somehow because of the content that can be delivered in a much more compelling way. So imagine looking at a social media app and looking and watching and scrolling the stories and the reels, for example, and watching some ads. But imagine at how you could watch this content with a 3D shape that is really immersive around you, and how that could be even more convincing compared to a 2D video on a smartphone or an iPad. So yeah, I think there is a lot of there are a lot of opportunities for creating new content. And here I connect with Michelle and the content creation era where we live in. But also there should be ways to actually safeguard how this content is shared to
I think
consumers.
this is interesting. It's taken me back to, I think it might have been one of the first Cambridge Festival sessions I was invited to chair. It might have actually probably would have been the Festival of Ideas back then. And I think it was the Department of Psychometrics. I hope I've got that right. And basically they were explaining how you could look at Facebook and other social networks, and just perhaps by your use of language and what you clicked on, they would be able to almost know as much about you as your wife did. And if you put that into the metaverse with all the things that are developing there, there's the sense that even more information can be handed over without the giver even noticing it.
There is definitely that risk, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because just yesterday I was able to read an interesting document that was released by Apple around the privacy features that they have implemented in the Vision Pro. So actually companies are really taking this matter seriously. And I think because of the work that organizations and academic institutions do on really shining the light on the opportunities, but also on the challenges and risks, companies are really taking seriously the opportunities to create those strategic documents, but also to implement features in their products that are going to really support the use of a more inclusive and safe and ethical metaverse.
Michelle, I wonder if we could come back to you for a while, and look at the kind of things that we can almost learn about ourselves from those interactions that we were discussing with Matteo a few moments ago. Can we learn things about ourselves, or is it all going to be other people doing the discovery about us?
That's a good question. I'm actually really passionate about this because I think when people talk about, so we care about building technologies which understand us better, because we believe it can help us do what we want to do better. So you think about use cases such as therapy for mental health, such as personalized training to accelerate pilots training, surgeon training, all these kinds of use cases. I think it's easy to see, how this information can be misused. And I think it's really important to have appropriate safeguards against that. But I think it's also really worthwhile thinking about, with all these rich depth of data, um, assuming you have a use case that is extremely compelling and that allows you to convert some of this data to information, like how can you, what I call, augment the human? Because traditionally people have been augmented. We see computers as our second brain a lot of times. And so the question is, if if a screen that you carry around can be a tool for you to store a lot of this extraneous information you don't necessarily want to keep in your mind, what about an immersive space? What type of augmentation can that deliver to you? I think that's a question that honestly a lot of people are still working out, and that's why you get startups exploring all kinds of fun ways to use the metaverse. But I'm keen to think about ways beyond entertainment as well, that we can use to augment ourselves.
It's interesting, this sort of idea of storing information away somewhere. That must surely take a lot of training of the brain to achieve that, because things, I'm sure you're the same as I am, things just come into your head from goodness knows how many years ago, and you can remember it very plainly. But go down the shops and I might come back with the wrong things because I haven't been able to remember a list. you know. So being able to, I don't know, compartmentalize one's life. That's, you know, you're getting into sort of almost generational change here.
Yeah, I mean, I think we appreciate by being human that, you know, the humans are flawed. There are a lot of things which we know we can do better, whether that is, you know, simple things like memory, or whether it's, you know, maybe being more less addicted in quotes to social media than we'd like to be. And there's so many things we want to do to unlock our own potential. And the question is, you know, how do you use technology to as a force for good, to
But that
unlock
requires discipline.
potential?
It's almost like a human thing, though. It requires us to have the discipline in order to use the devices, because, you know, we'd be back into ethics again if we were
Yeah.
talking about the devices making us do it a particular way.
Yeah, I think it's discipline. I think it's understanding people more deeply than perhaps have traditionally been understood. So this might be, you know, bringing in psychology, anthropology, neuroscience. It's beyond, you know, say conversations. It's almost understanding the deep level of human interaction. So, you know, when I interact with someone, what are we trying to achieve there? When I interact with an object, what am I trying to achieve there? I think there is, of course, that notion of free will and discipline that we, you know, have to impose on ourselves, some kind of, you know, desire to do something and not. But I think, you know, there are other perhaps a subconscious way as well that with a better understanding of it, you know, maybe we can help ourselves, you know,
Yeah.
as opposed
So,
to.
so what sort of use cases are going on around that at the moment? If we break away from the, you know, the fun side of the of imaginary worlds, how is it being used? I don't know, in medicine, for the sake of argument, to be able to do something that hitherto wasn't possible.
Yeah, I think the most immediate use case, and I'd be interested in, you know, what you think, Shannon and Matteo. I think the most immediate use case, which is perhaps more undeniable, is in training. And so that is both training yourself as well as training other people. So we have seen um, more immersive than ever simulators. Training simulator has, you know, it's not a new thing. It has always been happening, but these are better. These are closer linked to the real world, gives you skills which are more transferable. So there isn't so much of that, you know, far transfer learning. Um, and there's also teaching of other people. So say an expert is doing something, the opportunity for thousands to experience this at once, exactly what their decision-making process might be, both physically as well as cognitively, how they might be able to control their emotional state, for example, when things are going wrong. So there's a lot of that immersive learning that all points towards, you know, better delivery or training. So we can help people do the tasks that they want to do, but better. But I'm, you know, what do you think, Shannon, Matteo? What are some of the, you know, further out use cases that aren't necessarily challenged by ethics at the moment?
Yeah, Michelle, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the future, like what some of the most promising applications of of extended reality technologies and metaverse technologies is in skills training, as well as in healthcare. There have been a lot of studies that have assessed that, like in terms of like skills retention, like doing these kinds of like trainings in VR actually makes you more likely to like really be prepared for that scenario in real life. And it might be very expensive to kind of create that real life scenario, whether it be a surgery or whether it be, I know that like the US and UK military use this for like delivering medical care in crisis scenarios. That might be difficult to kind of recreate in real life, but doing it in VR is cheaper, and it also is very effective in teaching people skills. And all of those data, all that data that's being collected by these devices, a lot of it's used is to assess how quickly you're learning something. It's supposed to assess cognitive load based upon like how sweaty your hands are, how your heartbeat is going. All of that data is used to assess, are you learning this skill very well? Are you struggling with this concept? And then the simulation kind of adapts to you. And having these kinds of like these different kinds of apps that create scenarios like that. Like I was playing the other day where there was an app where you were able to practice public speaking, and it measured your gaze to see if you were looking at different people in the audience. It's just all these different applications of these technologies to make us better, to help us learn, to help us improve, and to give us like kind of like a sandbox to practice these skills and to become better. I think is like the future of this technology for sure.
It's quite interesting if you're saying that as I understand it, I guess the technology could be used to adjust. So as somebody gets a little bit better at something, the task would automatically, presumably, be made harder for them to do in order to get a better learning, and the device not necessarily concentrate on something which it's decided you're doing perfectly fine at.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of nice because especially for like people with like learning disabilities or who like maybe are struggling like more with maybe a quantitative concept but can do other concepts better. It can be kind of adaptive to your skill set and your mind. But obviously we have a long way to go. These are still really nascent apps. But yeah, the applications are kind of endless.
See, I don't like some of these things. I don't know if I want people finding these things out. I remember I went for a job interview at a magazine in London. They made me do a psychometric test, and it basically told them all the things which I could have told them if they asked me in the first place. But there is this sort of, I don't know, sort of nervousness about lots of people holding information about you that you wouldn't necessarily always want to share, and they're finding it out simply based on how hard you can hit a tennis ball in a virtual reality scenario.
Yeah, and I think that there are probably some conclusions from the data that we don't want these companies or these apps to make about us. I mean, Apple is basically securing patents for emotion recognition, which is notoriously kind of a space that is filled with pseudoscience, and especially because like different cultures have different expressions of emotion. And it may not be like applicable across the board, but they're securing patents to use those biometric information to make assumptions about maybe an emotion that you're experiencing. And that might be something that somebody doesn't want to share. And for the other different data types, like that might be used to make an assessment of your of medical conditions or your employment status or your marriage status. So it's like there are just so many different data types and so many different strange correlations to get to these conclusions. And do we really want these companies, like we need to decide, do we want these companies to make these kinds of conclusions about us, and what is kind of off the table in terms of a targeting and assumption?
Gosh, I wonder if Apple will be hiring a whole lot of actors in order to test their system to see if they can fool the emotions. Matteo, perhaps you've got some real world scenarios and examples that you can give us at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And, before jumping into some real world scenarios, I think we have to stress out the concept of knowledge and awareness, because inevitably it's years, it's decades that companies are collecting data about us. Apps, web browsers, cookies, and there are, the cookies from your browser, not the cookies from your jar in your kitchen. And
Well, I guess if I go to my doctors, they'll know that age 2 or 3 I had an issue with eczema. So these things do build up over considerable time.
absolutely. The electronic health records, a lot of countries are really trying to push towards the creation of these electronic records where all your medical conditions are stored, all the information around your medical conditions are stored in those records. And, I don't think it's a question of uh, um, how likely the data will allow companies to shape a persona or an understanding of each of us, but it's more about how likely people are aware of the consequences of sharing some data, or actually are aware of the potential of this data to be in the hands of some organizations that we might not have a clear understanding of what they do with that. Just coming back with the conversation around the use and the use cases of metaverse technologies. The industrial metaverse is really one of the most promising examples, together as well with the gaming and productivity and entertainment. But in the industrial metaverse, there are really opportunities for workers in factories that are really following a step-by-step process to install engines or motors into vehicles, or for example, repairing some really complex pieces of technology that require a specific training. And of course, in that way, you can keep track of, as just before Shannon was saying, how likely this individual is able to learn and learn fast how to reassemble or repair that component, but also it can allow the company to assess productivity and benchmark the productivity among different employees. So again, the question is how these companies are going to use data, and most importantly, how much people know about this data shared back to those companies.
It's quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'm thinking some of this information, the metaverse and that within it is just getting us there more quickly than it otherwise might have done. You know, piecing together various items of information, but it's doing it at a speed that normally, I don't know, for an employee might take several months, maybe even a few years before their aptitude is discovered and they're sent to that part of the company which is absolutely right for them.
Absolutely. And I think now we reached a point in the evolution of the technology that is disruptive. So up to a couple of years ago, without the deployment of these large-scale use cases of AI and mass distribution of AI, companies had data, but not a lot of companies were able to actually organize the information and parse the information from raw data into actual insights and decisions. This was really hard. And a lot of companies have been struggling to use this data and leverage this data. But nowadays, with this democratization of artificial intelligence technology, there are more opportunities to actually leverage much more data than what companies have been done before. So this is actually a question we should be asked. How fast is going to be the use of data, of raw data, and transformation of this raw data into insights and meaningful information for companies? This is going to be accelerated for sure, and we have already proof of that. But we have to think about the speed, the magnitude, and the impact of this transformation of data usage from companies.
So it's the speed of the processing, I guess, in part, which is moving things along, and then the interpretation afterwards.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I completely agree. And I really liked what you said, Matteo, about impact, because I think a lot of people, we don't want to build tech for the sake of building tech. I think really dissecting the problem, the societal challenge, whether it's a big problem or a small problem that you're trying to solve, really understanding what is it. I think that's the first step in making any type of useful technology or in innovation in general. Once you understand, the impact, then you can see, how far away are we from being able to build something that will help us alleviate some of these problems. Is it the fact that we're lacking in the raw data to insights? Is it, a data challenge? Is it a more fundamental technology challenge? So I think but then, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, right? Because if you don't know the potential of the technology, it's difficult to think of what are the most promising use cases. And so I think it's coming, hand in hand as people use the technology for more use cases, even if it's not, necessarily the ultimate use case the technology is going to be great at, then it allows us to learn a bit more about it, and then we think of more ways to use it. And then by thinking of more ways to use it and showing real challenges that it's solving, it gives us more confidence to invest and build in the technology. So I think if you enter this, as Matteo said, this disruptive era where there's this positive feedback loop between, the impact of the technology and investment in that technology, then that's when you see, the technology starts to take off and exceed its niche use case.
I wonder how much, if we step back as humans and we look at our sort of interactions within the metaverse, whilst the machinery is finding out and working out our best selves, are we able, if you like, to process our own experience and then learn from it directly?
That's a good question. I often try to boil it down to what people care about. So humans are kind of simple and complicated in that way. We care about our occupation, so our work, and everything surrounding that. So education, continual learning, being fulfilled and good at your job. We care about leisure and entertainment, and going beyond entertainment, but also arts, travel, tourism, things like that. We care about commerce, so how we intersect and transact outside of work and play. And that might be, real estate or the homes that we live in, buying and selling that, luxury, fashion, yeah, just the experiences we get outside of commerce. So, there are almost a finite, I would say, number of dimensions where we really care about innovate, and of course healthcare. So there's the human mind and body. So both physical as well as mental health is a huge thing. So there's almost this finite dimensions, and I think understanding how the metaverse helps us in each of these dimensions, maybe some in the shorter term, some in the longer term, and how it can harm each of these dimensions, through whether it's threat actors, or whether it's harming ourselves by misinformation, or by not knowing
I
it.
wonder if something bad happens to us within the metaverse, do we react to it in the same way that if we had done the same thing had happened to us in the street?
It's difficult to say. Everybody kind of has a different experience in headset. Some people kind of experience like this ghost sensation where like when somebody actually touches them, they sincerely feel it. Because basically you've got like spatial audio, you're completely immersed, so it feels very real. But I think that with the integration of like haptic wear, there are like for controllers, for vests, basically kind of making the metaverse a bit more real. It can provide you feedback. So that I think will make when people experience different experiences in VR, it'll seem a bit more real. But in terms of, we do need to ensure that for especially for like social networking spaces, a lot of the problems that have been coming up are people receiving attention that they don't want from strangers, where they're like being just approached and things like that. And those experiences can be negative and can affect people very deeply. And that's a UX issue. There need to be more tools integrated into these platforms that allow people to have the experience that they want. So whether it be like a virtual boundary to keep people away from you, or allowing only certain people to kind of get into your inner circle. These are things that are UX issues. And this is why we have beta testing, to see like, how do people react when they're in these social networking situations in the metaverse, and what do they like, what do they not like, what are the controls that they would want.
I think for starters, I'd probably want controls better than we have on social media right now. I forget who it was. We mentioned hate speech a little further back, and that still happens. However, I try to adjust my settings, it still turns up sooner or later, and surely something has to be done to prevent that from simply being replicated in the metaverse?
Well, the thing is, it is being replicated in the metaverse, and it's actually worse because it's live and it's spatial. So you can hear someone yelling at you terrible things from behind you. And how do you stop that in the moment? Because you can't really stop, like it's live. So these companies are learning a lot of lessons from like massive multiplayer video games, like online Call of Duty, these kinds of games. And they basically have moderation that is voice focused. I believe many of them use a company called Modulate, and it records conversation in real time and can translate it into text and then do the moderation. But it's still very spotty, and it's also very expensive computationally to process all of that information everywhere.
That's quite interesting. So, of all the things that we can do within the metaverse, moderation is still something which is complex enough to be too expensive to bring it in.
Yeah,
well,
I think
go ahead,
this is interesting because you think, oh, this is like how you can't, nobody moderates the real world, right? Like we walk down the street and there's no sort of bigger figure going, you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to shout that. And for me, that's the difference between the virtual and real world, because the real world almost doesn't need moderation because people have some kind of innate social restraint or something like that. But that
We have the
seems to be
filters, don't we?
gone.
You put somebody on the artist formerly known as Twitter, and before you know it, they're hurling abuse at absolutely everybody. And you meet that person maybe in real life, and they're as timid as a mouse.
Yeah, so when in the virtual world, things change, right? There's a lot of less restraint, and then there's this problem of moderation, and companies I think are learning the hard way, because it's a space with so many landmines, right? You release a feature with perhaps all the best intentions or not, and then something happens, and then you just have to keep correcting yourself. But for me, the key is how do you understand the difference between the real world and the virtual world as well, so that you can try to anticipate. You won't be perfect, but try to anticipate some of these challenges that will occur.
And are they the same players involved? That's to say, the big gaming brands, are they the same ones who we're seeing in the virtual space, who maybe have some sort of experience of what's going on? Or are there a lot of startups just entering into it blind because they think that's a good place to go?
I think that it's a mix, but I would say that the companies that are investing the most into this technology and also to like launching social platforms are many of them are formerly social media companies that generate a lot of their revenue from targeted ads. So, I mean, this is a very data-rich environment for them to kind of monetize. So I think that that's an incentive. But yeah, you've got like players like Meta, but many big time players have pulled out, like Microsoft closed alt space and things like that. But right now, you have also video game companies launching their own headsets, but it's kind of like a slow movement closer. It gets very complicated when you create a social networking site in the metaverse, just because there are so many issues and so many mixed experiences from the user's perspective. So I think people are kind of hesitant. And you have like these low scale kind of actors creating unmoderated social networking spaces, but then you have situations like VR chat, which are completely riddled with abuse, no monitoring, and it's not a very good user experience. It's kind of like an extreme kind of 4chan kind of environment. So it's a mix. We're still figuring it out, but there's small players, but mostly big players.
Shannon, one thing which is sort of overlapping, if you like, from the social media world, and with, I think it's something like half the population of the world is going to be voting in an election or have the opportunity to over the next 12 months or so. And I'm wondering if there is the opportunity for people to have mischief in terms of elections within the metaverse, as there seems to be within social media.
That is it's definitely a super valid concern, and a couple of academics have started to think about like now that we're having concerts in the metaverse with like celebrities hosting, how far away are we from having a like political rally in the metaverse and on these platforms. I think we're still pretty far away, just because I think the adoption is it's pretty low. But I would say that that's a lot of data streams at a political, like at a metaverse political rally. And it's like, you know what I mean? You could be able to adapt that rally and environment, and even maybe what the politician says, if you're using like a digital twin or something, targeting those people. But that is a super sci-fi, far away possibility. But I would say that that's kind of risky. And then also another thing is a lot of generative AI tools are being integrated into the metaverse, where people can create any content that they want and then make it into like a 3D object. So this is being used in like Roblox to create political rallies, or rallies in solidarity with different causes, political, like basically virtual worlds, where people are kind of like expressing their opinions, but with a whole like VR background to it. So I think that seeing the ways that these tools are going to be applied for political mobilization will be interesting, but I just don't think that we're seeing a ton of it yet.
I kind of like the idea of maybe sort of recreating sort of a political rally or a political debate which never happened. You know, something like Harry S. Truman versus Donald Trump, or Harold Macmillan against Tony Blair, something like that, to see what might come up as a result. Just before we finish, I'd kind of like to get the views of each of you really as to where we all are in terms of how far. There's this phrase which was sometimes used referring to a mature technology, and I wonder how far we are away from the metaverse being such a mature technology. Matteo, I'll start with you.
It's hard to say. We're definitely closer now than we were 10 years ago. And remember that the metaverse without AI is just an idea. So AI will boost the creation of content, the collection of data, and the transformation of data into insights. So with AI, we're getting closer for sure.
Okay, Michelle, where would you say we were?
Yeah, it depends on, mature in use case or mature in technology. I'd say because it's an amalgamation of technologies, as technology continues to develop, I think new innovations will be pulled in to enhance, this virtual world, this metaverse experience. For example, making the blockchain more efficient, helped it in a certain way. And I think so I think technologically, it will continue to get more mature, even if it's not, obvious or in step changes. And I think in use case, I think with the dynamic ecosystem of startups and big companies, it will also slowly become more mature. But I'd say we are probably, in terms of seeing this used by everybody, is still a ways out.
Okay, I don't think anybody's put a number on it yet so far. Shannon, how far would you say we were away from a mature metaverse?
I don't know if I'm brave enough to put a number on it, but I would say that we're still many years away from widespread use of these technologies. But I think that with seeing companies like Apple kind of put forward a product that is more focused on personal productivity, we're kind of seeing different ways. We're seeing it less as a gaming device and more as a productivity tool. And I do think that there's just a ton of investment. I know that some people say by 2030, it might be much more applied and more of a really common mode of spatial computing, and like maybe even like a replacement for your laptop or your smartphone. But I do think that we're quite a ways out from widespread adoption. But I do think that there are a lot of startups that are getting very excited about this space and building out unique apps. And I think that over time, especially with big players like Apple kind of making it this luxury product for personal productivity, I think that we're getting closer and closer.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can I say that question wasn't really about the number, it was more about the journey as much as anything else. Well, Shannon, Matteo, and Michelle, thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. And you can find out much more about all sorts of subjects, either online or by attending some of the Cambridge Festival events in person. Thanks all very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.